Yo, it's Robert. I'm reviewing Mid90s.
I love me mature women though.
Get the fuck out of the front of my store.
Fuck you! Fuck out here.
Yo, I'm out. Stay out of my fucking room, Stevie.
So I saw the trailer for Mid90s like a few months back, and I have to say, I'm a whore for A24. Then I find out it's directed by Jonah Hill, so I have to watch it. So I just kind of had it bookmarked for a while. Well, here it is, folks. Guess who our soundtrack guy is again? Yeah, ambient piano noises, but they shelled out for Nirvana, Cypress Hills, and other old school shit, because this movie's about nostalgia. Now, the main theme of this movie is about the effects of poverty on Los Angeles families. Nah, really, it's about skateboarding and growing up as a lost boy trying to belong, yo. I'm going to compare this movie, Jonah Hill's directorial debut, to another recently released and very similar directorial debut, and that is Bo Burnham's 8th Grade. These two movies fit so well together, you could like watch them back to back to get little male and female perspectives of being a prepubescent, troubled, white suburban, single parent, outcast kid, you know, coming of age films. So the story is told exclusively from this kid Stevie's perspective, played by some kid who nails like every subtle facial expression so well. And then you got a pretty good, natural feeling, rounded out cast that reminds me a lot of maybe the characters in Recess or Hey Arnold. Like the low-key leader of the group who's a bit more mature for his age and maybe faced some hardship in the past. And you get a comic relief character who doesn't give a shit or just happy to party, stuff like that. You got a character who's played dumb and maybe made fun of, but has like a little bit of a redeeming feature that comes into play. And yeah, this is just going to be spoiler filled, so if you're wondering if you should see it, just go see it. It's a pretty flawed movie with some weird shit, and 8th Grade does the whole concept a lot better. You'll see why as I make comparisons later. But go see it, it's still good. So you know Jonah Hill talked to Scorsese in the process of writing this? I mean, you can see the influence. He was in Wolf on Wall Street after all. Basically, nice kid gets fucked up, rise and fall. I guess you could say that's kind of the Scorsese formula. Only it happens to a 13-year-old. I mean, it's kind of weird to think that this kid gets accepted into this group of like 18-year-olds, 16, 17, 18, and at first he's like trying cigarettes, which is like plausible to the plot. But then it just gets more extreme in that Scorsese fashion, and no one's stopping him from like hitting the bottle at parties and smoking a bunch of weed, and it just gets so crazy. Yeah, Stevie is this kid in a single mother household with an older brother who hardly gives two shits about him, but Stevie clearly looks up to him, so he falls in with a group of misfits at a skate shop, and it's got all the classic acceptance tropes, and you know, he's learning to skate and the gradual fall from innocence. And yeah, with me being kind of on the later edge of a quote 90s kids, it's just shameless nostalgia. I'm not even a skater, and it's not like anything is particularly in your face 90s, but just the way everything was so analog and tactile back then, and people communicated differently. There were no cell phones, blah blah blah. Those were the days. I personally relate to Stevie, later nicknamed Sunburn, quite a bit, because there's a scene where the kids are attempting a dangerous skate stunt, and while normally being a quiet, reserved, seemingly cautious kid, Stevie just attempts a stunt seemingly out of nowhere in a moment of like unexpected bravery. I remember doing shit like that on my bike to impress older kids. So in classic Scorsese fashion, like I mentioned, Stevie's arc just starts spiraling out of control to where there's like alcohol and sex involved and drugs, and there's a scene where he gets pretty intimate with an older girl. Now this kid's like 13 and the girl's, I don't know, 16, 15. It was weird, unnecessary even. And I don't want to be that guy, but yeah, just think if the genders were swapped. Jonah Hill's script just calls for a lot of unnecessary excess, like, that doesn't serve the plot very well and just drives it into darker dead ends. As in, the movie had me really engaged until I realized it really was written into a dead end and just off the fucking rails. It had some great shots of LA, some amateur skate hangouts, you know, raunchy fun, funny dialogue, and some really cathartic moments where you're rooting for Stevie. But the problem is there's no lesson. And that's not to say that it needs to be a lesson to be a good movie or a movie at all, but there's no consequences. And you might say, oh, it doesn't need consequences. Well, let me just tell you about the climax and where my suspension of disbelief just shattered. One of the kids in his skate group has a car, right? And it's established that this kid is a partier. Always out at parties, right? Drinks pretty frequently, and yeah, he just drives all his bros around. Well, drunk driving scene. Somehow the gang is convinced to get in the car and let his drunk ass drive. I mean, he's obviously drunk. Now, I get it, they're teenagers, but even I, back then, as a teenager, would most likely have opted out. So they crash, and miraculously, no one dies, but Stevie's injured, and he's in the hospital, and just in this heartwarming scene, all his friends gather around his bed, visit him, and everything's okay. And the end is just this camcorder, skater, 90s hangout video. Great, except the driver would be in jail. Except more than a few people would be angry. Except people could have died. It feels like Jonah Hill just couldn't figure out how to end the dark spiral of this 13-year-old going crazy and just the whole lack of authority. So it just ends with a quick dramatic car crash climax and then a feel-good everything was okay skate video. It doesn't make me hate the movie, but come on now. Also, I'd like to talk about the mother. She's barely a character. She seems concerned about her son's well-being and has like a murky, questionable past as a mother that could have been explored. There's only one scene about it, alluding to it. And she makes a pathetic attempt to like reel in her son, but is otherwise just ineffectual and inconsequential to the plot. How much of a shit does she really give? We'll never know. Then you got Stevie's older brother, who's actually used pretty well in the movie as kind of a measuring stick of how fucked up Stevie's getting. Because in the beginning of the movie, he's just this threatening older brother who beats up on the kid, and he's got the grunge kind of goth look going on, and you don't know what he does. But towards the end of the movie, it really turns out he's not that bad of a kid, just raised not so well by perhaps an uncaring mother. And really, there's never a moment of closure between the siblings, but that's understandable because that happens a lot in real life situations where they just can't end up communicating. So I think he's a good character overall. Here comes the comparison to 8th grade. The father is much more of a presence, and despite a falling apart between parent and child, in that movie there's a cathartic moment where things are allowed to be explained and resolved for the viewer. Characters being given dimensions and, characterized. In 8th grade, there were 2 very intense moments. I would say 2. And they were well placed and impactful. They mattered. In Mid90s, it's just this one continuous scene after scene. Just look how crazy it's getting with no direction or purpose. It sounds like I'm shit-talking this movie too much, but really I enjoyed it. Even if the ending was a bit disappointing. I think Jonah Hill's real purpose here was creating a tribute to his 90s skater childhood that he loved, And he accomplished that, and it works. So really, I recommend it, and I look forward to more Jonah Hill movies.